Shadows clung to the narrow streets, stretching long and cold under flickering lanterns. An empty square lay silent, the echoes of distant laughter twisting into something brittle and uneasy. Footsteps fell irregularly, lost in the chill wind that whispered through closed windows. Somewhere, a faint melody of celebration trembled on the edge of hearing, carrying with it a sense of unease. Beneath the surface of mirth, a quiet danger waited, patient and unseen. Across the frozen plains of ancient lands, the first light of winter struggled to pierce the heavy gray sky. Villages huddled behind stone walls, smoke curling from crooked chimneys, while long nights stretched on with an almost deliberate wait. In the cities of medieval Europe, narrow alleys twisted into shadowed corridors, and the wind carried whispers of fear from one home to the next. Humans moved with cautious ritual, lighting fires, offering small tokens to unseen powers, as if each gesture could bend the capricious whims of fate. The calendar itself became a fragile lifeline, a fragile promise of order in a world ruled by uncertainty. In these times, celebration and dread were inseparable. The turning of the year brought both hope and foreboding. Frost clung to the edges of doors and windows, and the barren trees cast skeletal patterns across silent streets. Beneath the flicker of candlelight and the murmur of prayer, tension thickened slowly, unseen yet palpable, as if the world itself were holding its breath for an unknown calamity. The passage of time has always been a human obsession, a fragile attempt to impose order on a world of chaos. Seasons came and went with relentless certainty, yet life itself remained precarious, subject to famine, disease, and the whims of rulers or the divine. To mark the turning of the year, civilizations created rituals, festivals, and ceremonies, a way to anchor themselves against uncertainty. It is within these observances that the shadows of history first gather, and the story emerges, the dark history of New Year. In ancient Babylon, the first known New Year celebrations coincided with the vernal equinox, a time of planting and promise. Offerings were made to gods, and the streets echoed with both revelry and whispered fear. The Romans later claimed the first day of January, dedicating it to Janus, the two-faced god of beginnings and endings. Crowds gathered, sacrifices were offered, and leaders sought omens to secure favor. But even the grandest ceremonies concealed an undercurrent of anxiety, a recognition that fate was never fully within human control. Medieval Europe carried the tradition into candle-lit halls and frozen villages. Bells rang to signal the year's passage, and communities feasted to ward off misfortune. Yet famine, plague, and political unrest lurked behind every celebration. Superstition thrived in quiet corners. Unlucky omens, forbidden acts, and whispered warnings haunted the merriment. Early modern Europe brought public spectacles and elaborate countdowns, yet beneath the spectacle lay vulnerability. A single misstep, a poorly heeded warning, could turn joy into catastrophe. Across time and place, the marking of a new year remained a precarious dance between hope and fear. Every ritual carried the weight of human desire to control destiny, yet each gesture also revealed how fragile that control truly was. What appears today as tradition or festivity was once a tense gamble with forces beyond comprehension. Ordinary celebrations, no matter how grand, could mask danger. And as history reveals, beneath the candles, the wine, and the song, peril waited patiently, often unnoticed, until the moment it could no longer be ignored. Across empires and kingdoms, the marking of the new year became not only a ritual but a demonstration of power. In Babylon, priests and kings orchestrated grand ceremonies, their every gesture designed to assert dominion over both people and the unseen forces they believed governed fate. Temples glimmered with torchlight, streets filled with processions, and yet behind the veneer of control, anxiety lingered. Leaders consulted omens, read the flight of birds, and interpreted cryptic messages from gods, their authority bound tightly to interpretations that could shift with the slightest misreading. Rome carried the weight of empire into its January celebrations, dedicating the day to Janus, the god who gazed both backward and forward. Senators, magistrates, and citizens alike followed prescribed rituals, offerings, and public games. The city itself became a stage for spectacle, Yet beneath the marble and banners, human frailty persisted. Decisions made in ignorance or haste could invite calamity, and even the most powerful rulers were never immune to misfortune cloaked in the guise of divine judgment. In medieval Europe, monarchs and clergy maintained a fragile grip over their populations. Candlelit feasts, church bells, and public proclamations reinforced authority. Yet superstition remained a potent force. A miscounted prayer, an unlucky charm, a whispered rumor of ill fortune could unsettle entire communities. Cities like Paris, Venice, and Prague became arenas where public order collided with private fear, each celebration a careful balance of ceremony and caution. Early modern Europe expanded this display further. Nobles commissioned elaborate fireworks, clocks struck ceremonious hours, and civic authorities imposed regulations to maintain appearances. Yet the spectacle often concealed anxiety. Disease, hunger, or political tension simmered beneath the festivity. Omens were read in the behavior of animals, the movement of stars, and the subtle shifts in human demeanor. The very rituals designed to command fate revealed the fragile grip of those attempting to master it. Across time and place, the key forces shaping New Year observances shared a common tension: the illusion of control maintained for public display and the private dread that always lingered. Power, tradition, and authority offered a sense of security, yet superstition, misjudgment, and human flaw ensured that beneath the spectacle lay vulnerability. The greatest leaders, the grandest cities, and the most elaborate ceremonies were not shields against fate. They were stages upon which fear and ambition quietly contended, and where history would sometimes exact a silent, devastating toll. Preparations began weeks in advance, each village, town, and city moving with meticulous care to welcome the turning of the year. Streets were swept, fires stoked, and tables laid with food meant to symbolize prosperity and protection. Leaders and priests issued instructions, yet beneath these organized efforts, cracks were already forming. Warnings whispered by astrologers went unheard, minor signs of misfortune dismissed as trivial or inconvenient. A falling star over Babylon was shrugged off. A flock of birds scattering chaotically in Rome elicited nervous glances but no decisive action. Each overlooked omen, each small act of hubris, planted a seed that would grow unnoticed. In medieval Europe, villagers observed these days with equal caution. Children were sent to gather firewood at dawn, women arranged protective herbs at thresholds, and the ringing of bells echoed across snow-laden streets. Yet the routines themselves seemed fragile, prone to collapse under the weight of human error. A lantern left unattended sparked a minor blaze in a market square. A sudden winter storm forced processions to halt. A traveling minstrel collapsed in the cold, his passing whispered to be a sign of imminent ill. Superstition turned accident into portent, and gossip twisted ordinary misfortune into foreboding prophecy. Within the courts of kings and emperors, the tension was no less tangible. Plans for elaborate banquets and public displays were made with precision, yet every decision carried consequence. An improperly aligned astrological reading delayed ceremonies in Venice. A miscounted prayer disrupted a ritual in Paris. Those in authority felt the weight of expectation, each fearful that a mistake could invite catastrophe upon the populace, or upon themselves. The smallest lapse, unnoticed by most, magnified in the eyes of those who believed fate watched every detail. Even as festivals began, unease permeated the air. Crowds gathered with anticipation, yet whispers of omens spread quietly. A child born on the wrong day, livestock found dead overnight, a stranger arriving with ill tidings. Rumors fed anxiety, and in some towns people began to avoid streets, fearing that the ritual year's turning carried more danger than promise. Authorities struggled to maintain order, their commands strained against the weight of fear. Subtle cracks emerged in the careful choreography of the celebrations. A misfired firework, a minor scuffle over offerings, a procession halted by a sudden illness. By the final eve before the new year, tension had become palpable, invisible yet suffocating. The streets glimmered with light, the air filled with music and chatter, but beneath the surface, A quiet dread threaded through every action. The world appeared ready for jubilation, yet the careful rituals had only barely held chaos at bay. Each overlooked warning, each ignored omen, each tiny misstep had accumulated, like frost gathering on a fragile window pane. And as the hour approached, anticipation hung heavy, thick with the knowledge that unseen forces, both human and other, were already stirring, ready to test the limits of order and caution. As the new year approached, cities swelled with anticipation. Crowds thronged the streets, eager to witness processions, hear bells, and partake in age-old ceremonies. Markets overflowed with goods, fires burned brighter than ever, and yet the surface festivity could not conceal the undercurrents of unease. Political tensions simmered quietly, rulers mindful of unrest, governors wary of rebellion, and clergy uneasy with the unpredictability of the populace. Each decision, each decree carried weight, for one misstep could ignite chaos where once there was order. Fear spread silently, like fog creeping through cobbled streets. Superstition intensified. Whispered tales of ill omens multiplied as if fueled by the cold wind. A sudden illness in one district prompted rumors of a curse, while unusual weather patterns, snow falling early, frost biting harder than expected, were interpreted as portents of misfortune. Every unexpected sound, every shadow, every unaccountable misstep magnified in significance. People began to question the safety of the streets they had walked since birth, hesitant to leave their homes or to trust even the familiar rituals. Rulers and religious authorities felt the pressure acutely. In Venice, magistrates inspected bridges and squares repeatedly, ensuring that crowds would not spill into danger. In Paris, priests repeated blessings, attempting to assuage fear while privately doubting the efficacy of their words. Orders were issued, proclamations read aloud, yet the human instinct to anticipate disaster made compliance uneven. The fragile balance between ritual and chaos teetered on the edge, and in moments of uncertainty, whispers of mass hysteria grew louder than reason. Natural hazards waited patiently in the background. Rivers swelled from unseasonable rain. Icy streets claimed the unwary. Disease lurked in crowded dwellings, its spread invisible yet inevitable. Violence, too, became a latent threat. Old grudges, opportunistic thieves, and panicked mobs all lay hidden within the festive chaos, ready to erupt at a single spark. Even the most meticulously planned celebrations could not contain these latent dangers. Yet, as midnight approached, the world seemed to hold its breath. Streets glimmered with light, bells rang in solemn rhythm, and processions moved with practiced precision. The air, thick with expectation, carried a deceptive calm. For now, the rituals had maintained their fragile order, and the crowds appeared safe, oblivious to the forces, human, natural, and unseen, that had gathered quietly around them. This lull, serene and fleeting, was the stillness before the storm, a pause pregnant with the knowledge that the next moment could shatter all that had been so carefully preserved. At the height of celebration, when bells had struck and fires burned brightest, the delicate balance of ritual and order shattered. A sudden calamity, small in origin but immense in consequence, rippled through the city. Perhaps a pyre toppled during a crowded ceremony, sending sparks into wooden scaffolding. Perhaps a river overflowed, sweeping away the unprepared. Or a mysterious illness erupted among the masses, invisible yet swift. The spectacle that had once bound the community together became a conduit for chaos. Immediately, control slipped from the hands of those who sought to maintain it. Priests faltered in their chants, rulers gestured helplessly from balconies, and citizens scattered in confusion. Markets, streets, and squares erupted in noise, shouts, cries, and the sound of breaking wood and stone. Fear became tangible, a heavy presence pressing down on every observer. People turned on one another, suspicion igniting disputes, while rumors of divine wrath spread faster than reason could contain them. Private dread, long held in quiet, now collided violently with public panic. Those who had performed rituals with careful precision discovered their efforts meaningless against the unfolding catastrophe. The omens that had been ignored or misread now seemed prophetic, their warnings fulfilled with terrifying accuracy. Human ambition, belief, and preparation were revealed as fragile constructs, unable to command the forces they sought to appease. The visual landscape of the city mirrored the emotional turmoil. Fires flickered wildly against darkened skies. Snow and ash mingled, and shadows moved unpredictably through streets now chaotic and treacherous. The carefully orchestrated rhythms of celebration were replaced by disorder and confusion. Families clung to one another, strangers collided in frantic attempts to escape, and the air itself seemed heavy with expectation turned nightmare. Even as authorities attempted to reassert some semblance of control, it became evident that the disaster had changed everything. The city, the people, the very rituals themselves were no longer safe or predictable. In that moment, the slow-burn tension of anticipation erupted into a vivid, undeniable truth. Fate, human error, and the unseen forces long feared had converged. And as the dust and smoke thickened, there was no relief, only the foreshadowing of suffering yet to come, a darkness that would stretch far beyond a single night, touching every corner of the community in its relentless reach. In the wake of the catastrophe, the city unraveled slowly, in stages both visible and invisible. Streets once filled with celebration became corridors of fear. Fires, whether accidental or intentional, consumed wooden structures, leaving charred skeletons where homes and marketplaces had stood. Markets collapsed under scarcity. The rhythm of trade faltered as hunger gnawed at the edges of survival. Those who had gathered in hope now scattered, moving through alleys and squares with wary, trembling steps. Every corner seemed to conceal danger, and even familiar pathways appeared treacherous in the dim, smoke-choked light. Communities fractured under the weight of distrust and panic. Families who had once celebrated together now huddled apart, eyes darting toward neighbors, searching for signs of contagion, theft, or betrayal. Rumors became reality, whispered tales of curses and vengeance spreading faster than any disease. Violence erupted quietly at first, a shove in the dark, a stolen loaf of bread, but soon escalated. Desperation sharpened instincts, turning ordinary citizens into reluctant participants in survival's brutal calculus. Every human gesture carried risk, and every attempt at aid was shadowed by suspicion. Rituals, once the fragile lifelines that had bound society together, collapsed entirely. Priests and leaders attempted to continue sacred ceremonies, but their voices faltered against the chaos. Candles burned down to stubs, altars were overturned, and sacred offerings lay abandoned in the streets. What had been acts of protection and celebration were rendered meaningless, and the populace, once obedient and hopeful, recoiled in fear. The spiritual scaffolding that had promised order now seemed impotent, leaving only the raw, unmediated reality of survival. Hunger and disease followed quickly in the aftermath. Famine stalked the weakened, their bodies brittle and spirits dimmed. Plagues moved silently among the living, invisible but relentless. Those who survived initial disasters faced not relief but ongoing torment. Grief became a constant companion. Each morning brought the sight of empty houses, abandoned possessions, and the hollow eyes of those who had lost everything. Children cried for parents who would never return, and elders wept for knowledge, traditions, and comforts that had vanished. The human mind, strained by loss and fear, sought explanation in superstition, omens, and rituals that could no longer protect them. Psychologically, the survivors were marked by shame and guilt, haunted by choices they had made or failed to make. The memory of inaction, of overlooked warnings, of rituals abandoned too late, pressed upon them like the weight of the coldest winter. Even when safety returned in fragments, the knowledge that catastrophe could strike again lingered, unspoken yet ever present. People avoided familiar streets, shunned long-standing celebrations, and carried silent fear into the mundane tasks of daily life. The city itself seemed to mourn. Streets lay empty at dusk, echoing with silence where once there had been laughter and music. Fires smoldered in ruins, smoke curling into a sky that had grown permanently gray. The structures of society, commerce, ritual, governance, lay fractured, fragile and untrusting. Every movement, every gesture, was measured against memory and caution. Human suffering became both a spectacle and a quiet, enduring weight. And as the world around them darkened, it became clear that the event had not been an isolated moment of terror, but a turning point from which normalcy would never fully return. The collapse, once sudden and violent, settled into a slow, pervasive silence, leaving only the shadowed remnants of what had been and the lingering dread of what might yet come. In the years following the catastrophe, the city and its surroundings began to reconstruct themselves, brick by brick, street by street. Markets reopened, fires were lit once more, and rituals resumed, though in altered forms. Some ceremonies were simplified, stripped of their earlier grandeur, while others were quietly abandoned, forbidden by authorities wary of repeating past mistakes. New traditions emerged, cautious and measured, shaped by the memory of disaster. The familiar rhythms of life returned outwardly, yet beneath the surface unease lingered. What was lost, however, could not be replaced. Generations of knowledge, rituals perfected over centuries, the careful reading of omens and the nuanced understanding of communal practice, vanished in an instant. Lives abruptly ended, left voids in families, neighborhoods, and the collective memory of the people. Trust, once the foundation of society, had been fractured. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion, and authority itself carried the weight of past failures. The threads that bound communities together were frayed, delicate as frost on a winter window. Chroniclers and historians recorded these events with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Some emphasized the moral lessons, framing the disaster as a punishment for hubris or impiety. Others documented facts with stark detachment, dates, deaths, and the structural damage, preserving evidence for posterity. In their writings, the interplay between fear and ritual, human error and fate, was evident. Yet even these records could not fully capture the pervasive dread that had gripped the living, nor the quiet anxiety that would echo across generations. Superstition persisted, surviving even as reason regained some measure of influence. Children were warned of omens long after their original meaning had faded. Townsfolk altered their habits to avoid repeating the past. Elders spoke of the catastrophe in hushed tones, careful not to invite the same misfortune. The shadow of what had occurred remained a silent companion, shaping behaviors and beliefs in ways both conscious and unseen. Time healed the most visible scars, but the memory of loss and uncertainty lingered, woven into the fabric of everyday life. Streets once filled with laughter and ceremony now carried the weight of recollection. Rituals, though resumed, were shadowed by caution. The city and its people bore the invisible imprint of fear. In the quiet aftermath, the catastrophe remained alive, not in destruction, but in the lingering echoes of what had been lost, and in the subtle, enduring question of what might yet befall them. In the generations that followed, society adapted in ways both visible and subtle. Celebrations were reshaped, stripped of excess or confined to private spaces. Laws were introduced to regulate gatherings, control the timing of rituals, and prevent repeat disasters. Certain customs, once commonplace, became taboo, whispered about only in private, their original purpose obscured by fear. Communities carried forward a cautious memory, an inherited wariness encoded into the rhythm of daily life, ensuring that the shadow of past calamity lingered quietly alongside renewed festivities. Yet not all truths were preserved. Some were deliberately suppressed by those in power. Political authorities manipulated the narrative, emphasizing divine favor or human folly to consolidate control, while conveniently obscuring mismanagement, neglect, or structural failures that had worsened the catastrophe. Social inequities were rarely acknowledged. The poor bore the brunt of suffering, while the elite preserved their position, recording events selectively to absolve themselves. Entire disasters were minimized, erased, or recast as cautionary tales, leaving historians to sift between propaganda, superstition, and fact. Conflicting narratives emerged, each layer blurring the line between myth and reality. Chroniclers described omens, curses, and portents, while others presented cold statistics and dry accounts of death and destruction. Superstition and reality intertwined, and even centuries later, it remains difficult to discern where history ends and legend begins. What is recorded in public memory often conceals as much as it reveals, a curated version of events shaped by fear, ambition, and the limits of human understanding. Even today, traces of this darkness endure in modern New Year customs. Subtle anxieties, lingering superstitions, and rituals whose origins are forgotten carry the weight of centuries-old fear. Beneath fireworks, revelry, and resolutions, an unspoken caution persists, an inherited vigilance, quiet yet persistent. The past, though obscured by time and tradition, continues to cast its shadow, reminding us that human attempts to control fate are fragile, and that some of the darkness woven into our celebrations may never be fully understood. History, when observed closely, is less a line than a circle, a pattern of rise, celebration, and quiet undoing. Human beings, in their desire to impose order, construct rituals and traditions meant to anchor them against the unknown. Yet those very acts of control reveal the fragility of existence, the tenuous thread that separates security from chaos. Every candle lit, every bell rung, every gesture repeated across centuries carries with it the echo of fear and the shadow of what might go wrong. Even in moments of joy, uncertainty lurks, patient and indifferent. The same celebrations that unite communities also expose them, leaving them vulnerable to chance, human error, and the unseen forces that govern life's delicate balance. The line between protection and peril is thin, and the illusion of mastery is easily shattered. The new year, with all its promise of renewal, remains a mirror of this tension. Hope intertwined with apprehension, tradition shadowed by the weight of memory, and ritual intertwined with risk. Beneath the songs, the laughter, and the lights, the past persists quietly, whispering that disaster can return, that human certainty is fleeting. And so the cycle endures. We celebrate, we prepare, we fear, and we stumble. The darkness of what has been, silent, patient, unrelenting, lingers still, unanswered, unresolved, and perhaps eternal, leaving the human spirit both defiant and trembling before the inevitable unknown.